Well, for more on Syria, let's speak with Michael Stevens. He's a researcher at the think tank, the Royal United Services Institute in Doha. And Michael Stevens joins us from the Al Jazeera studios in Doha. Michael Stevens, thanks very much for your time this evening.
Hi, Scott. How are you?
Very well, thanks. What's the latest you've been hearing coming out of Damascus in regard to the ongoing and deepening conflict?
Well, there was an escalation of conflict last night, obviously on the back of the shocking news and developments that had happened which struck the core of the Assad regime yesterday. The regime attacked in 5 or 6 different areas of the city. Heavy fighting was known to have taken place, particularly in Medan and in the southern central areas of the city and also in the northeast. The Free Syrian Army seems to have held its position quite well in the last 24 hours, despite the increased onslaught from Assad's forces. We've even heard some unconfirmed reports that the Free Syrian Army was making gains. And in fact, some mention on Twitter, for example, that they were shelling the airport even, which is again unconfirmed. But at the moment, I think that the Free Syrian Army and Assad loyalist forces are engaged in a fierce struggle which is continuing to increase in both violence and scale. And this is obviously to be expected as Assad looks to hit back.
Beyond killing 3 of his top aides, how much damage do you think has been done by virtue of this attack to the Assad regime?
I think it's very damaging, actually. Mostly is the sort of inspirational factor, you know, the motivational factor for Assad's forces. Obviously, Asaf Shawkat was very, very close to Bashar al-Assad. He entrusted him implicitly with security operations within Syria, and this has been a huge blow for the stability of their regime. Also, of course, you know, the fact that the defense minister, Rajha, has also died has created quite a difficult period now for the defense forces to go through. At the same time, the fundamental structures in the Syrian army remain intact. So that, you know, these people can be replaced. It's a question more, though, that within, you know, in terms of internal regime stability, is there trust anymore? You know, this was a very, very well-coordinated, well-planned attack that was obviously, you know, assisted by someone from the inside. So if the regime's most elite members could be, you know, targeted and killed, then other regime supporters and other elite parts of the regime are going to be worried as well. And I think that bodes very badly for Assad's, you know, internal cohesion and for his ability to rule the country in you know, coming weeks.
Michael, you said a moment ago that Assad will hit back. But as you just point out, given that it might stretch all the way into his inner circle, perhaps here, as shown by this attack last night, how will Assad respond?
Well, I mean, we've already seen it. Increased shelling, for example, in urban areas. There's been reports from Homs and Idlib that military operations have increased there. The Israelis indicated that Syrian forces were pulled away from the Golan on the border with Israel to deal with some of the problems in the urban metropolitan area of Damascus. I've also heard reports that 200,000 reservists are now being mobilized in order to counter the threat from increased Free Syrian Army activity. Unfortunately, the worst development of all really was the reactivation of the Shabiha, who last night went into some areas of Damascus and did what we know they do well, which is slaughtering innocent civilians. So that's the reaction, I'm afraid. It's not pretty, it's not pleasant, but this is the way that he needs to re-establish deterrence.
Michael, the Reuters agency has reported sources saying that Assad himself has gone to a coastal city and he's directing the government response from there. Yet at the same time, we heard the US, in response to this, say that this is all an indication that Assad is rapidly losing control of Syria. So on the one hand, we're hearing he's directing the response, on the other that he's losing control. Which is it, or is it a mixture of both those perceptions?
Well, I think it's a mixture of both. He is still in control. We still don't know, actually, if he's in Latakia. You know, I just recently spoke to a couple of people in Syria to ask them to confirm this, and they couldn't confirm it themselves. So we actually don't know where Assad is right now. So this is a complicated question, but he is in control. His brother Maher al-Assad will obviously assume a lot more control of armed force activities as well. Wherever Maher is around, there's still a good, top hand controlling armed forces activity in the country. I think that the Americans, took a little bit of a liberty there by saying it's spinning out of control. Yes, it's been damaged. The regime has clearly been rocked, but it's not, the final blow for the regime, and they still are able to activate, intelligence units, Air Force intelligence units, and to command, some of the more elite forces on the ground. And some of these elite forces are going to be pretty tough to defeat.
Looking to the international response, or what it may well be, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights Group has estimated that yesterday alone 214 people were killed, more than half of them civilians. Now, when you're facing that sort of toll in one day, how much pressure is that going to put on the UN Security Council to pass a resolution to put down a firmer step to try and bring this to an end?
I don't want to sound like the bringer of misery here, but that's not going to change Russian calculations whatsoever, I'm afraid. Human rights calculations don't seem to have ever changed Russian calculations. What will cause the Security Council to at least move forward slightly is the sense in Moscow that their ally is now not as stable as they had previously thought, and that they may actually have to start thinking about an endgame to this situation, which is coming a lot quicker than they had assumed. I think that the Russians felt that if they gave a plaster cast of security around the Assad regime in the Security Council, that this conflict could be managed and a transition could go on in the coming months. Now, obviously, the military situation rather than the humanitarian situation right now is driving this. I think yesterday was a key wake-up call for the Russians. Really, they've tried to stand stoic in the face of obviously what is a devastating blow to the regime and pretend that all is well, but I'm afraid not everything is well. And I think the Russians need to seriously consider their strategic position right now and give a bit of ground in the Security Council in terms of allowing UN monitors to go in and do their job properly, with the backing of sanctions, and tough sanctions, if Assad's forces do not comply with the resolution.
How long do you think Assad can remain in power?
Oh, a difficult question. If you'd asked me 24 hours ago, I would have said 2013 at the very earliest. Now, the trouble with regime implosion is that it comes very quickly and very suddenly, and almost without prediction. Of course, as this bombing happened yesterday, it came very quickly and very suddenly. At the end of the day, though, the core of the regime, it has been rattled, but it's not been destroyed. It's going to take some time to grind the regime down, I think, both in the international arena and in the domestic military arena. The Free Syrian Army can't just roll into Damascus and take it over. They are facing the 4th Division commanded by Maher al-Assad, and they will fight. There are stories of defections from the 4th Division, but I don't really think that those are true. Maybe in other areas of the country you're starting to see increased defection now. Shaukat was a very inspirational figure for some troops, and obviously they will desert as they feel that the Assad regime can't provide them with what they need to stay in the army. But I think that right now we're probably looking at weeks rather than months.
If it is a grinding change like this, Michael, and I know it's another crystal ball question, but based on what we've seen so far and what's playing out presently, what do you think the post-Assad Syria will look like, not just politically, but for the Syrian people?
Well, this is something, unfortunately, that is the responsibility of the Syrian opposition and the National Council, including now, the Kurdish leadership that has taken over since Galyun stepped down from power. In my view, I'm afraid they've not been very impressive, and I'm not convinced, actually, that a transition as it currently stands would be ultimately successful and that we would see a democratic Syria. I think, unfortunately, with the shock that we've experienced yesterday, that's brought this timeline forward, and right now, I'm afraid the various opposition factions in Syria really don't seem to be able to work many of their problems out. That's quite a worry, because obviously, we know that there are divisions in the Syrian people. It's not necessarily sectarian. I think that's too simple a lens to put on it. But there are issues to do with, the cohesion of the country and how that might, play out when they try and rebuild institutions without Alawi dominance. It's going to have to be a fraught negotiation process. I'm not wholly convinced that it will be a successful one, but with some some international oversight, we might be able to get some stability, peacekeeping force there perhaps, in order to ensure security for minorities while the political machinations play out.
Michael Stevens there in Doha. Really appreciate you sharing your knowledge with us tonight.
Thank you.